Have you ever thought to yourself that, all these people who believe in God, they are just trying to disprove why evolution can't be true and why we can't have living cells come out from random chemicals bashing into each other, but they are not even presenting their own model, their own scientific model of then, well, you guys explain, right? You're just saying our model doesn't work, but then show us a model of how life could have come about, right? So have you ever asked yourself that question that, these people are just the God of the gaps people, and whenever they can't understand something, they just say, oh, God did it. So I actually got made aware of this question because of our best comment winner from our previous video, which is about how amino acids disprove evolution, and you can check that out if you haven't yet. And technically, it's not disproving evolution because evolution is about how small, simpler organisms can become more complex ones, but more that video was disproving how random chemicals can form the very first or original cells that evolution would then act upon to turn into complex creatures like us, humans. So Frosted1030 says, and I'm just going to read one part of the comment, that, you lack a model. And this means you have nothing to support. You're just denying what you can know and proposing what you cannot know. Okay, so I really understand that sentiment. I think a lot of atheists would also say the same thing about those who believe in God. And this video is my attempt to give an answer to that. Okay, so the first thing I will say is that I acknowledge that you are right. I don't have a model, because I don't know how God created the first organisms. And in fact, my model is overly simplified because all I know is that from Genesis chapter 1, God creates every living thing as it is, fully formed. He didn't use evolution. He didn't create like a single cell and then he used evolution to make it. So I just know that he just created it as it is. Well, he's God, right? He's in control of all matter and all molecules, all atoms. He could just have arranged them into place like that. And that is my model that I have in my head so far. And I take this also from how the description of the first man, Adam, was created. It says that God took him from the dust and formed a man out of him. So I can visualize like he brings up the dust, swirls it. And if you think about it, we are created from elements that are not only found in the dust or the soil. So God could have so-called transmutated some of the elements into other elements, or he could have just made them appear out of nowhere if he wanted to as well. I mean, he is in control of the laws of physics. He can do anything he wishes. And he then forms the shape of our human body, the man, and then he breathes the breath of life and the man became a living soul. So that is how I envision God creating life. But I will not be able to give you a scientific model to substitute the evolutionary model. So in that video about amino acids, I basically showed that, okay, this atheistic model is flawed and it doesn't work, but I cannot give you another model that only operates within the realms of the known laws of physics, because I assume that God violates the laws of physics when he does something like that, when he creates living things like that. Now, Genesis also says that he created all these living things to reproduce after their own kind. So that means that after he's done the first supernatural creation of all these living things, they can then go on to naturally reproduce. And that does not violate the known laws of physics. However, to answer the very first creation of each type of living thing, I cannot give a model that fits within our measurable science that we know today. But here's the thing, when speaking to someone with an atheistic worldview, I'm going to assume that they're not going to accept my answer as, well, God created life and whatever I just said as the answer. They are going to say, no, you have to give me a scientific model. You cannot just say supernatural. And so I'll give you an analogy to help you understand how it's like being in my shoes. So imagine someone says to me, if a human flap their arms hard enough, they can fly like a bird. And if they train their arms, if they flap really hard, they can fly. Then I proceed to show them that with the mathematical calculations, the physics calculations, that even with you train as much as you want, you can put on all this muscle mass to prove that no matter how fast you can flap your arms, you just can't fly. Because you aren't as light as a bird, you don't have the wings that can create air currents to give you lift, so you just can't fly. And then the person says to me, okay, you have disproved my model wrong, but you haven't given me a new model that shows me how it can be done. Then I'll tell them, well, my friend, there is no model I could show you, because what you're asking for is simply impossible, at least to the laws of physics. If you want a human to fly on his own without a plane or something to help him, you have to do something outside the natural laws of physics. In other words, something supernatural. But if such a person subscribes to naturalism or atheism, meaning that they believe the laws of nature and the laws of physics are all that exists and that's all that can explain life and the universe, then they won't even consider the possibility that there could be a reasonable explanation that doesn't give a model within our scientific understanding. So you see, this isn't a matter of providing a scientific model. It's a matter of worldview. When we have the atheistic and naturalistic worldview, we exclude any explanations that are beyond what we can scientifically observe and beyond the laws of nature. We say that this is basically garbage or gibberish or just fairy tales because you're assuming that the natural laws are all that ever exists and existed. So they could be the only ways to explain the origin of life. But if you have a theistic worldview that there is a God, there is a creator, then you would follow the evidence, even if it leads you out of that nice comfort zone of our observable and understandable science. It might lead you out of that to consider, okay, maybe the fact that there's a DNA code shows there is a DNA coder who created all this information. Maybe the intricate design we see in the feathers of a bird or how the human circulatory system works so well is due to the fact that there might be a designer. So this is very timely because I recently watched this interview with John Lennox, Stephen Mayer, and Michael Behe, where they expose how scientists, and not just scientists actually, anyone with the atheistic worldview limits themselves to purely naturalistic explanations. And the full interview is going to be in the description of this video.
The Socratic Principle that is often violated, that the late Antony Flew saw, that when he came to conclude that there was an intelligent designer behind the universe on the basis of DNA, and they said, oh, but you can't do that. He said, I follow the evidence where it leads. And this is the clash that arises. You can either say, well, science has come to an end. It cannot answer this question. There are very few people want to say that. Or you say, science is limited. We must open the field to other kinds of questions, like the why questions of purpose, like teleology and all this kind of thing. And the underlying mistake that we're forced to think is that science and rationality are coextensive when they're not.
And also that
that is to say, science does not cover the full field of rationality.
No. History is a rational discipline.
And
So is
there are
philosophy.
other kinds of sciences, and this is what my PhD was about. There's historical
historical
scientific reasoning, which is all about abduction, inferring back to to explain causal origins. Imagine that you walk into the British Museum and you look at the Rosetta Stone, and someone says, "Well, how did those inscriptions come about?" If the archaeologist is governed by a principle that you alluded to indirectly, it's called methodological naturalism. We may only infer materialistic causes, whatever the evidence. The scientist would miss the obvious explanation. This was produced by scribes,
right,
by intelligent agents. There are distinctive indicators of the activity of intelligence, and therefore that allows us to infer. There was one of the early pioneers in the information sciences named Henry Quasler said that the creation of new information is habitually associated with conscious activity. In other words, our uniform and repeated experience affirms that there's only one type of cause that produces information. But uniform and repeated experience is the basis of all historical scientific reasoning. So there is a basis in historical scientific reasoning to infer intelligent design. There's no need or reason to limit the conclusions that we can consider in that branch of science, because
unless, and here's the bottom line for all of this, unless you presume a naturalistic worldview and imprison yourself within its confines.
That's the key issue.
That's not fair. If the evidence leads beyond a naturalistic view, you must pursue it, correct?
Why
Yes,
why shouldn't you?
All right.
But why shouldn't you? That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're closing yourself
artificially
within a prison.
All right.
So yeah, that's my answer to atheists who demand a scientific model. My answer is that, sorry, I can't provide a scientific model because I believe that there was a supernatural creator who did not use the laws of nature as we now see to create the very first life forms. So if this video was helpful to you, please subscribe. If you disagree, you can also tell me in the comments. And here's a video of why I don't believe in evolution, explained in a way so simple that even teenagers can understand.